My son-in-law texted me, "Let me know when the will reading is. I just want my millions," while my daughter lay dying in the hospital bed 3 rooms down the hall. I stared at that message for a full minute, watching those cold, calculating words blur through my tears, before I realized that everything I thought I knew about my family was about to shatter like glass. The man I'd welcomed into our lives, who'd held my daughter's hand at their wedding and called me Mom for 7 years, had just revealed exactly what kind of monster he really was. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Let me back up and tell you how we got here. Because this story starts 3 weeks earlier, when I still believed I was a grieving mother-in-law, instead of what I actually was, the next victim on a very carefully planned hit list. It was a Tuesday morning when Dr. Martinez first used the word terminal about my Sarah's cancer. I remember because I was holding her hand when he said it, and I felt her fingers go completely still in mine. 43 years old, mother of 2, and suddenly we were talking about months instead of years. The doctor was professional, kind even, but when you've been a nurse for 38 years like I have, you know the difference between hope and preparation for goodbye. Sarah took it better than I did, honestly. She asked about treatment options, about time frames, about what we needed to do for her boys. Meanwhile, I sat there thinking about all the things we'd never get to do together again. No more Christmas mornings watching her face light up when the boys opened their presents. No more Sunday afternoon phone calls that stretched into the evening. No more of her terrible cooking that I pretended to love because she tried so hard. That's when her husband Marcus walked in, checking his phone instead of looking at his wife who just received a death sentence. "How long is this going to take?" he asked, not even bothering to sit down. "I've got that conference call with the investors at 2. Dr. Martinez explained the situation again, while Marcus scrolled through emails. When the doctor finished, Marcus finally looked up. "So what's the timeline we're looking at here? I need to know for planning purposes." Planning purposes. Like he was scheduling a renovation instead of watching his wife die. But Sarah just squeezed my hand and said, "Marcus has been working so hard on this new business venture. I don't want my illness to derail his success." Even then, even knowing what I know now, part of me thought maybe I was being too harsh. Maybe different people process devastating news differently. Maybe his coldness was just shock, and underneath he was falling apart like the rest of us. But when we left the hospital and he immediately started making phone calls about repositioning assets and timeline adjustments, something cold settled in my stomach. That night, he ordered Chinese takeout instead of cooking for Sarah like he usually did, claiming he was too stressed to focus on meal prep. When I offered to make her favorite soup, he waved me off. "We're trying to maintain normalcy here, Mom. Sarah doesn't need to be treated like an invalid yet." As if he was already counting down to when she would be. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of doctor appointments, insurance paperwork, and watching my daughter try to pretend everything was normal while her husband acted like a man preparing for something other than grief. Marcus started working late every night, claiming the new business needed intensive attention during this crucial phase. He'd come home after Sarah was asleep, grab a beer, and spend hours on his laptop doing what he called essential planning. When I suggested he might want to spend more time with his wife while he still could, he looked at me like I'd suggested he quit his job and become a street performer. "Joanne, someone has to think about the practical matters. Sarah's medical bills are going to be substantial. The boys' college funds can't just evaporate because we're being emotional instead of strategic." Strategic. He used that word a lot during those weeks. Everything was strategic planning, strategic positioning, strategic thinking. Never once did I hear him use words like love or grief or how he was going to miss her. But it was the phone calls that really started to worry me. Hushed conversations that stopped the moment I walked into a room. References to timeline acceleration and moving up the schedule. When I asked Sarah about it, she just smiled sadly and said Marcus was trying to secure their financial future before the medical bills started piling up. "He's being so responsible, Mom," she told me one afternoon, while Marcus was allegedly at another investor meeting. "I know he seems distant, but he's just trying to take care of everything so I don't have to worry." I wanted to shake her and tell her that responsible husbands don't discuss timelines and asset repositioning when their wives are dying. Responsible husbands hold hands and cry and make bucket lists and spend every possible moment soaking up whatever time they have left. But Sarah had always seen the best in people, sometimes to her own detriment. The first truly alarming moment came when I overheard him on the phone with someone named Trevor. I'd come by unannounced with Sarah's favorite magazines and let myself in with the spare key she'd given me years ago. Marcus was in his home office, door cracked open, speaking in the low, urgent tone he'd been using a lot lately. "No, we can't wait that long," he was saying. "The window is narrowing faster than we anticipated. We need to move to Phase 2 by next week at the latest." Phase 2? I stood frozen in the hallway, magazines clutched against my chest, trying to make sense of what sounded less like business planning and more like military strategy. "The documentation is already in place," Marcus continued. "Once the main obstacle is removed, everything else should proceed smoothly. The beneficiary changes were processed last month, and the insurance company confirmed the policy is fully active." Beneficiary changes. Insurance policies. Main obstacle removed. My blood went cold as I realized what I was hearing. The main obstacle wasn't a business competitor or a financial hurdle. The main obstacle was my daughter. I backed away slowly, my mind racing. When Sarah came downstairs 20 minutes later, pale and thin but still beautiful, still trusting, I couldn't bring myself to tell her what I'd heard. How do you tell your dying daughter that her husband might be planning to help her along? Instead, I smiled and handed her the magazines and told her I loved her, all while my brain screamed warnings that I didn't yet have the courage to voice. That was my first mistake, but it wouldn't be my last. Sarah died on a Thursday morning in March, with both boys holding her hands and me stroking her hair while Marcus stood by the window making what he claimed was an urgent business call. Even in those final moments, he couldn't be fully present. When the monitors went flat and the nurses came in with their gentle efficiency, Marcus hung up his phone and approached the bed with what I can only describe as carefully practiced grief. "I'm so sorry for your loss," the doctor said to both of us. But Marcus was already checking his watch. "What happens next?" he asked. "In terms of procedures, I mean. Timeline for arrangements and that sort of thing." The doctor looked taken aback by the clinical tone, but explained about death certificates and funeral home notifications. Marcus nodded like he was taking notes for a project presentation. Meanwhile, I sat there trying to process that my daughter was gone, really gone, and her husband was treating her death like a business transaction. The boys, 13 and 11, were devastated, but handling it better than their father was pretending to. Jamie, the older one, kept asking when Daddy was going to stop making phone calls and help them plan the service. Tyler, my sensitive youngest grandson, just kept staring at Marcus with a confused expression, like he was trying to solve a puzzle. "Dad seems happy," Tyler whispered to me while Marcus was in the hallway supposedly handling urgent arrangements. "Is that normal when somebody dies?" I didn't know how to answer that without planting seeds of suspicion in a grieving 11-year-old's mind. So I just hugged him tighter and promised him we'd get through this together, all of us, even though I was starting to doubt Marcus belonged in that equation. The funeral was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Marcus insisted on handling all the arrangements himself, claiming he wanted to spare everyone else the burden of difficult decisions. When I offered to help with the flowers or the programs or anything at all, he politely but firmly declined. "I've got everything under control, Mom," he said, using that patient tone people use when they're managing someone they consider incompetent. "The best thing you can do is focus on supporting the boys through this difficult transition. Even grief was becoming corporate speak in his mouth. But it was the guest list conversation that finally convinced me something was seriously wrong. I'd assumed we'd be notifying Sarah's college friends, her book club, the neighbors who'd become like family over the years. Instead, Marcus presented me with a list of names I'd never heard of. Business associates, he explained. People who'd been important to Sarah's life in ways I apparently didn't understand. "What about Jenny and Rebecca from her book club?" I asked. "They've been calling every day asking about arrangements." Marcus waved dismissively. "Sarah outgrew those relationships years ago. She told me she found their conversations superficial and draining. This service needs to reflect who she really was in her final years, not who she used to be." I stared at him in disbelief. Sarah had just been talking about her book club the week before she died, laughing about how Jenny always picked romance novels and Rebecca insisted on Russian literature. They'd been planning to read The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo together after Sarah got through her next round of treatment. "I think you're mistaken about her feelings toward her friends," I said carefully. Marcus's expression hardened just slightly, enough to remind me that technically he was the widower here and I was just the mother-in-law. "I think I knew my wife better than anyone, Joanne. I understand this is difficult for you, but I need you to trust my judgment about what Sarah would have wanted. What Sarah would have wanted. Past tense, spoken by a man who'd spent her final weeks on business calls instead of beside her bed. But before I could challenge him further, his phone buzzed with a text message that made his face light up in a way I hadn't seen since before Sarah's diagnosis. He quickly turned the screen away, but not before I caught a glimpse of a woman's name and what looked like a heart emoji. A heart emoji. 3 days after his wife's death. That's when I knew for certain that everything I'd suspected about Marcus was true, and probably worse than I'd imagined. The funeral was scheduled for 10 o'clock on Tuesday morning. At 9:30, I sat in the front pew of St. Mary's Catholic Church, the same church where Marcus and Sarah had been married 7 years earlier, watching relatives and friends file in to say goodbye. The boys sat beside me in their black suits, Jamie trying to be strong for his younger brother, while Tyler clutched the small photo of Sarah I'd given him. At 9:45, there was still no sign of Marcus. "Where's Dad?" Jamie asked, his voice cracking slightly. "He's supposed to speak first." I checked my phone. No messages, no missed calls. I'd tried calling him twice that morning to confirm the timing, and both calls had gone straight to voicemail. "I'm sure he's just running a little late," I told the boys, though my stomach was churning with anxiety and a growing suspicion that something was very wrong. At 9:58, Father Mackenzie approached our pew with a concerned expression. "Mrs. Patterson, we really need to begin. Do you know where Marcus is?" Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus. I opened it with trembling fingers, expecting an explanation about traffic or car trouble or some emergency that had delayed him. Instead, I read 7 words that changed everything. Family emergency. Start service without me. Sorry. Family emergency. His wife was being buried today, and he was somewhere else dealing with a family emergency. I showed the message to Father Mackenzie, who looked appropriately shocked, but professionally maintained his composure. "Well," he said quietly, "I suppose we'll need to adjust the program slightly." Adjust the program. As if the absence of the widower at his wife's funeral was just a minor scheduling conflict. The service proceeded without him, with me giving the eulogy I'd prepared as backup and Sarah's sister flying in from Denver to share memories of their childhood. The boys held up remarkably well, though I could see Jamie's confusion and anger building as the minutes ticked by and his father remained mysteriously absent. After the service, as we stood outside the church, accepting condolences and trying to explain Marcus's absence without sounding as bewildered as we felt, my phone rang. Unknown number. "Mrs. Patterson?" The voice was male, professional, unfamiliar. "Yes? My name is Detective Rodriguez with the County Sheriff's Department. I'm calling about Marcus Patterson. Are you his mother-in-law?" My blood went cold. "Yes. What's happened? Is he hurt?" "No, ma'am. He's not hurt. But we did want to let you know that we have him and a woman named Crystal Morrison in custody, following a domestic disturbance call at a hotel about 30 miles outside town. They were both intoxicated and apparently got into an argument that resulted in property damage. I stood there in my black funeral dress, surrounded by flowers and sympathy cards, and people offering condolences for my daughter's death, while a police officer explained that my son-in-law had been arrested at a hotel with another woman on the day of his wife's funeral. "Ma'am, are you still there?" "Yes," I managed to whisper, "I'm here. He's asked us to call you about bail arrangements. Apparently his regular attorney is unavailable today." Bail arrangements. While Sarah's body was being lowered into the ground, Marcus was calling me from jail, asking for bail money so he could continue his hotel tryst with Crystal Morrison. "Mrs. Patterson?" I looked at my grandsons, still too young to understand the full scope of their father's betrayal, but old enough to sense that something terrible was happening, beyond just losing their mother. "Tell Mr. Patterson," I said clearly, "that he can call someone else for help. I'm at his wife's funeral." Marcus showed up at my house the next evening, still wearing the wrinkled clothes from his jail stay and reeking of desperation mixed with whatever cheap cologne Crystal Morrison apparently favored. I watched him through my front window as he stood on my porch, checking his phone and running his hands through his unwashed hair before finally working up the courage to ring the bell. I let it ring 3 times before answering. Call it petty, but after watching my grandsons cry themselves to sleep the night before because their father had missed their mother's funeral for a woman named Crystal, I figured Marcus could wait a few extra seconds. "Joanne," he said when I finally opened the door, his voice carrying that practiced tone of wounded sincerity that I was starting to recognize as his default setting for difficult conversations. "We need to talk." Do we? I asked, making no move to invite him inside. Because I thought you might be too busy with your family emergency to chat. His face flushed red, but he pressed on. Look, I know how this looks, but you don't understand the whole situation. Crystal and I, we're business partners. She's been helping me navigate some complex financial arrangements related to Sarah's estate. And yesterday was supposed to be a brief meeting to finalize some urgent paperwork before the banks opened this morning. Business partners, estate planning, urgent paperwork. Even his lies came wrapped in corporate terminology. And this urgent paperwork required you to be intoxicated at a hotel 30 miles away during your wife's funeral? We were celebrating closing a major deal that's going to secure the boys' college funds, he said, his voice gaining confidence as he warmed up to his story. Sarah would have wanted me to prioritize their financial future, even if it meant missing some of the ceremonial aspects of the day. Ceremonial aspects. He was calling his wife's funeral ceremonial aspects. I stared at him for a long moment. This man I'd welcomed into my family, who I'd trusted with my daughter's happiness and my grandson's well-being. Standing there in his rumpled shirt, with his rehearsed explanations, he looked smaller somehow. Not physically smaller, but diminished in that way people shrink when you finally see them clearly. Where are the boys? I asked. They're fine. They're staying with Crystal for a couple days while I get some business matters sorted out. She's great with kids, and I thought it might be good for them to have a change of scenery after yesterday's difficult events. The boys were staying with Crystal, the woman he'd been arrested with at a hotel while his wife was being buried. The woman he claimed was just a business partner, but who was apparently qualified to babysit his grieving children. I want to see them, I said. That's actually part of what I wanted to discuss with you. Marcus's expression shifted, becoming more calculated. I've been thinking about what's best for Jamie and Tyler during this transition period, and I'm concerned that too much contact with people from Sarah's side of the family might make it harder for them to adjust to their new normal. New normal. Transition period. The man spoke like he was implementing a corporate restructuring instead of raising traumatized children. What exactly are you saying, Marcus? I'm saying that maybe it would be better for everyone if you took some time to process your own grief before resuming your relationship with the boys. They need stability right now, not confused messages about their father's choices or guilt about moving forward with their lives. I felt something cold and sharp settle in my chest. You're cutting me off from my grandsons. I'm protecting them from additional emotional turmoil during an already difficult time, he corrected, as if the distinction mattered. Once things stabilize and they've had time to adjust, we can certainly discuss rebuilding family connections. Rebuilding family connections. He was talking about my relationship with my own grandsons like it was a damaged business partnership that might be worth salvaging if the terms were right. That's when I realized this conversation wasn't really about the boys at all. This was about control, about making sure I couldn't interfere with whatever Marcus had planned next. And suddenly, all those whispered phone calls and strategic timelines and talk about removing obstacles began to make perfect, terrifying sense. Get off my property, I said quietly. Joanne, I understand you're upset, but get off my property before I call the police and tell them I have concerns about a man who missed his wife's funeral to get drunk with his girlfriend and is now refusing to let the children's grandmother see them. Marcus's carefully composed expression finally cracked, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. You don't want to make this adversarial, Joanne. You really don't. But I was already closing the door, my mind racing with plans of my own. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad, writing down everything I could remember about Marcus's behavior over the past month. The mysterious phone calls, the references to timelines and strategic planning, the beneficiary changes he'd mentioned to his friend Trevor, the way he'd controlled every aspect of Sarah's funeral arrangements. By morning, I had 3 pages of notes and a growing certainty that my daughter hadn't just died from cancer. She'd been helped along by a husband who was apparently in a hurry to collect on her life insurance policy and start his new life with Crystal Morrison. But certainty and proof are 2 different things, and I needed proof if I was going to protect my grandsons and get justice for Sarah. That's why I was sitting in the parking lot of Sunrise Elementary at 7:30 in the morning, waiting for the school buses to arrive. I knew Marcus's routine. He always dropped the boys off early for before-school care on Wednesdays because of his standing breakfast meeting with investors. If he was still maintaining his normal schedule despite supposedly keeping the boys with Crystal, I might be able to catch them before school started. At 7:45, I saw Marcus's silver BMW pull into the drop-off lane. My heart broke a little when I saw Jamie and Tyler climb out of the back seat, both boys looking tired and confused, but dressed for school like nothing had changed. Marcus didn't even get out of the car to walk them to the door. He just pulled away the moment their feet hit the sidewalk, leaving them to navigate their first day back at school after their mother's funeral entirely on their own. I waited until his car disappeared around the corner, then got out and approached the boys. Tyler saw me first and broke into a run, wrapping his arms around my waist with the kind of desperate hug that said everything about how he was really handling his father's new arrangements. "Grandma, where have you been? Dad said you needed time to feel better about Mom dying, but I wanted to see you yesterday, and he said maybe next week, but I missed you and—" "Slow down." Jamie approached more cautiously, his 13-year-old skepticism already beginning to develop. "Dad said you were having a hard time and needed space, but you seem fine to me. Smart boy. Too smart for his own good, probably, given what his father was likely planning." "I'm fine," I assured him, "and I would never need space from you two. Not ever." "Then why didn't you come see us?" Tyler asked, his voice small and hurt. "We stayed at Crystal's house, and she has a big TV, and she made pancakes. But they weren't like Mom's pancakes, and I wanted to call you, but Dad said not to bother you." Crystal's house. So they weren't just staying with her temporarily. They were living there, being fed by her, being told not to contact me. Marcus was already implementing his new family structure, with Crystal stepping into Sarah's role and me being systematically erased from the boys' lives. "Listen to me carefully," I said, kneeling down so I was at their eye level. "I want you both to know that no matter what anyone tells you, I will always be here for you. Always. If you ever need me, or if anything ever feels wrong or scary, you can call me anytime, day or night." I pulled 2 small cards from my purse and handed one to each boy. "I wrote my phone number on these cards, and I want you to keep them somewhere safe, where only you know about them. Can you do that for me?" They both nodded solemnly, understanding in that instinctive way children have that this was important, even if they didn't fully grasp why. "And if anyone ever asks you not to call me, or tells you I don't want to see you, that person is lying. Do you understand?" "Yes, Grandma," Tyler whispered. "Promise me you'll remember that." "We promise," Jamie said, and I could see in his eyes that he was starting to piece together that something was seriously wrong with their father's version of events. I hugged them both one more time, breathing in their familiar scent of shampoo and childhood and trying to memorize the feel of their arms around me in case it was the last time for a while. As I watched them walk into the school building, I made a decision that would change everything. I was done being the passive, grieving mother-in-law who trusted other people to do the right thing. It was time to start fighting back, and the first step was getting the proof I needed to expose exactly what kind of man Marcus Patterson really was. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I'd found online the night before. "Hartley Private Investigations," a woman's voice answered. "How can we help you?" "I need to hire someone to investigate my son-in-law," I said. "I believe he may have murdered my daughter." Rebecca Hartley looked exactly like what you'd expect from a private investigator who specialized in insurance fraud and suspicious deaths. Sharp-eyed, no nonsense, with silver hair pulled back in a practical bun and the kind of handshake that said she'd seen every type of human garbage and wasn't impressed by any of it. "Mrs. Patterson," she said, settling into the chair across from my kitchen table with a file folder and a digital recorder. "Tell me why you think your son-in-law killed your daughter." I spent the next hour laying out everything. The mysterious phone calls about timelines and removing obstacles, the beneficiary changes Marcus had mentioned, his absence from the funeral, the immediate appearance of Crystal Morrison, the way he was systematically cutting me off from the boys while positioning his girlfriend as their new mother figure. Rebecca took notes without interrupting, occasionally asking for specific dates or names. When I finished, she sat back and studied me with those sharp eyes. "How much do you know about your daughter's insurance policies?" she asked. I know she had life insurance through Marcus's company, something substantial, though she never discussed the exact amount. "And you mentioned overhearing him talk about beneficiary changes. When would those have occurred?" I thought back to that phone call I'd overheard. He said they'd been processed last month, so probably January, while Sarah was still undergoing treatment. Rebecca made another note. "Did your daughter ever mention feeling worse after taking her medications? Unusual symptoms, changes in her condition that seemed inconsistent with her prognosis?" My blood chilled as I remembered. "Actually, yes. In February, she started complaining about severe nausea and dizziness that her oncologist said wasn't typical for her stage of treatment. They ran additional tests, but couldn't find a cause. And Marcus was helping her manage her medications? He insisted on it. Said it was too important to leave to chance. The memory hit me like a physical blow. Marcus, so concerned about Sarah's medication schedule, bringing her pills with water every morning and evening, making sure she never missed a dose of what he claimed were her prescribed treatments. Mrs. Patterson, I'm going to need a few days to run some preliminary background checks and confirm some information. In the meantime, I want you to be very careful around Marcus. If your suspicions are correct, you've now positioned yourself as a potential threat to his new life with Ms. Morrison. She handed me her business card. Don't contact him directly about the boys or anything else. Don't let him know you've hired an investigator. Just live your normal life and let me do the digging. That evening, as I sat in my empty house thinking about Sarah's mysterious symptoms and Marcus's insistence on managing her medications, my phone rang. Unknown number again, but this time I was almost expecting it. Mrs. Patterson? This is Dr. Elizabeth Chen from the County Medical Examiner's Office. We received an anonymous tip suggesting we should take another look at your daughter's case. My heart started pounding. What kind of tip? Someone called our office this afternoon, claiming to have information suggesting that Mrs. Patterson's death might not have been entirely natural. They mentioned specifically that we should test for certain compounds that wouldn't normally show up in a standard toxicology screen. Anonymous tip. Rebecca worked fast, apparently. What happens now? I asked. Well, with the family's permission, we can perform additional tests on tissue samples we preserved from the autopsy. The process takes about a week, but it would give us definitive answers about whether any foreign substances contributed to your daughter's death. I thought about my grandsons, living with a man who might have poisoned their mother. I thought about Crystal Morrison, who was now helping to raise children whose father was potentially a murderer. I thought about Sarah, trusting and loving right until the end, never suspecting that her devoted husband was slowly killing her. You have my permission, I said. Test for everything. Rebecca called me 3 days later with news that made my hands shake so badly I had to set down my coffee cup. The medical examiner found traces of oleander extract in your daughter's preserved tissue samples, she said without preamble. It's a plant-based poison that mimics symptoms of advanced cancer while accelerating organ failure. In small doses over time, it would be virtually undetectable and would explain the sudden progression of her condition. Oleander. I knew that plant. Marcus had been so proud of the oleander bushes he'd planted along their back fence 2 years ago, claiming they added elegant natural beauty to the yard. Sarah had worried about them being toxic, especially with the boys, but Marcus had assured her they were perfectly safe as long as no one ate them. No one except his wife, apparently. There's more, Rebecca continued. I've been digging into Marcus's financial situation and his relationship with Crystal Morrison. The life insurance policy on your daughter was for $2 million, not the modest amount she probably thought it was. And Crystal isn't just his girlfriend. She's a licensed insurance claims adjuster who has worked on every single one of Marcus's policies for the past 3 years. Insurance claims adjuster, I repeated, the pieces falling into place. They've been planning this for a while, Mrs. Patterson. I found records of Crystal visiting your daughter's doctor's offices as Marcus's representative to discuss treatment options and prognosis. She was gathering information to help them time everything perfectly. My daughter had been murdered by her husband and his accomplice, who'd spent months planning her death while pretending to support her through cancer treatment. They'd used her illness as cover for slowly poisoning her, then positioned themselves to collect millions in insurance money while taking custody of her children. What about the boys? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. That's what worries me most, Rebecca said. If Marcus and Crystal are willing to kill for $2 million, they might see the boys as either additional obstacles or additional opportunities. Your grandsons are now the primary beneficiaries of your daughter's estate until they reach 18. If anything happened to them, everything would revert to Marcus as the surviving parent. The room started spinning. Are you saying he might hurt the children too? I'm saying we need to move fast. I've already contacted Detective Rodriguez at the Sheriff's Department with our findings. They're preparing arrest warrants for both Marcus and Crystal. But it's going to take another day or two to coordinate with the medical examiner and the insurance fraud division. A day or two might be too long, I said, thinking about Tyler's small hand slipping the emergency phone number into his backpack, about Jamie's growing suspicion that something was wrong with their father. I agree, which is why I'm recommending you take immediate action to protect the boys. Do you have any legal standing to request emergency custody? I thought about the sparse documentation of Marcus's neglect, his absence from the funeral, his decision to move the boys in with a woman they barely knew. Probably not enough for a court order. Then we need to be creative. When was the last time you saw the boys? Wednesday morning before school. Do you know their schedule? This Saturday is the championship game at Memorial Park. Tyler's been talking about it for weeks. Even with everything that's happened, Marcus wouldn't dare miss it without looking like a terrible father. Perfect. Public place. Lots of witnesses. And if we time it right, law enforcement can take him into custody while the boys are safely with you. As we discussed the details of our plan, I felt something I hadn't experienced since this nightmare began. Hope mixed with anticipation. Marcus Patterson thought he'd committed the perfect crime, eliminating his inconvenient wife while positioning himself for a comfortable new life with his accomplice and his victim's money. But he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated exactly how far a grandmother would go to protect her grandsons and get justice for her murdered daughter. Saturday was going to be very interesting. Saturday morning arrived crisp and clear, perfect weather for a Little League championship and a long overdue reckoning. I dressed carefully in my favorite red sweater, Sarah always said it brought out my eyes, and drove to Memorial Park 30 minutes early to claim a spot in the bleachers where I could see everything. Marcus arrived at 10:15 with the boys and Crystal, who I was seeing in person for the first time. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe mid-30s, with the kind of calculated attractiveness that came from expensive highlights and strategic cosmetic work. She wore jeans and a team t-shirt, playing the supportive stepmother role with the dedication of someone who'd practiced it in front of a mirror. Tyler spotted me immediately and started to wave, but Marcus caught his arm and said something that made my grandson's face fall. From my position 20 feet away, I couldn't hear the exact words, but I could read the boy's body language. Disappointment, confusion, the particular kind of hurt that comes from being told the person you love doesn't want to see you. Crystal leaned down and said something to Tyler that made him nod reluctantly. Then she straightened up and scanned the crowd until her eyes found mine. For a moment, we stared at each other across the baseball diamond. She smiled and waved like we were old friends, but her eyes held a warning. The game started with Tyler's team trailing early. He struck out in the first inning, clearly distracted and upset. Marcus shouted encouragement from the sidelines, playing the devoted father role for the other parents. But I could see the calculating way he kept checking his phone and monitoring the park entrances. In the third inning, I got the text message I'd been waiting for from Rebecca. Units in position. Give us 5 minutes, then start moving toward the concession stand. I gathered my purse and walked casually toward the food truck, my heart pounding, but my steps steady. Behind me, I could hear Crystal telling Marcus she was going to get sodas for the boys. A minute later, she appeared beside me in line, her friendly mask still in place. "You must be Joanne," she said brightly. "I'm Crystal. I've heard so much about you." I turned to look at her, this woman who'd helped plan my daughter's murder and was now pretending to be a loving addition to my grandsons' lives. "Have you?" "Oh yes. Marcus talks about you all the time. He's so grateful for how supportive you've been during this difficult transition." Supportive. Transition. Even Marcus's lies came equipped with corporate terminology when filtered through his accomplice. "It has been difficult," I agreed. "Losing Sarah so suddenly, so unexpectedly." Something flickered in Crystal's eyes. "Cancer is terrible. So unpredictable." "Yes," I said, almost like she was being poisoned. Crystal's smile never wavered, but her hand tightened on her purse strap. "I'm sorry?" "Oleander extract," I said conversationally, as if we were discussing the weather. "Fascinating plant. Beautiful flowers. Deadly if you know how to prepare it properly. Causes all the symptoms of advanced cancer while accelerating organ failure." Now her mask was slipping. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do. I think you and Marcus planned this whole thing very carefully. The insurance policy adjustments, the medication management, the timeline coordination. Very professional work." Crystal glanced around nervously, probably looking for Marcus or calculating her escape routes. "You're obviously upset about your daughter's death, but you're not thinking clearly." "Actually, I'm thinking more clearly than I have in months. Clear enough to hire a private investigator. Clear enough to request additional toxicology testing. Clear enough to contact the insurance fraud division and the sheriff's department." Her face went completely white. "You can't prove anything." "Can't I?" "Because Detective Rodriguez seems to think otherwise. In fact, he should be having a very interesting conversation with Marcus right about now." As if on cue, I heard a commotion from the direction of the bleachers. Raised voices, including Marcus's, demanding to know what was going on. Crystal spun around to look, and that's when I saw the exact moment she realized their carefully planned new life was falling apart. "The boys," she said suddenly. "Where are the boys?" I smiled for the first time in weeks. "Safe, which is more than I can say for you and Marcus." That's when she ran. Crystal made it exactly 37 steps before Detective Rodriguez's partner tackled her next to the third base line, sending her fake designer purse flying and its contents scattering across the infield dirt. Among the lipstick and car keys, I could see what looked like a small vial of clear liquid and a syringe. The game stopped completely as parents and children watched 2 more police officers escort Marcus Patterson from the bleachers in handcuffs. He was shouting something about his rights and demanding his lawyer, but his voice had lost all its previous confidence. Without his carefully controlled environment and corporate speaking points, he just sounded like what he was, a desperate man watching his world collapse. Jamie and Tyler stood frozen by the dugout, their faces reflecting pure confusion and fear. I made my way toward them through the crowd of murmuring parents and curious children, my steps steady despite the chaos around us. "Grandma?" Tyler's voice was small and lost. "What's happening to Dad and Crystal?" I knelt down in front of both boys, taking their hands in mine. Around us, the police were efficiently processing the crime scene while trying to minimize the trauma for the other children present. Detective Rodriguez caught my eye and nodded. Everything was going according to plan. "Your father and Crystal have been arrested," I said gently. "They did some very bad things, and now they have to face the consequences." "What kind of bad things?" Jamie asked, his 13-year-old mind already working to piece together the adult complexities he'd been sensing for weeks. I looked at these 2 brave, confused boys who'd lost their mother, and were now discovering that their father was her killer. How do you explain that level of betrayal to children who still believed in fairness and justice and the fundamental goodness of the people who are supposed to protect them? "They hurt your mom," I said finally. "They made her sicker than she already was, and they let her die when they could have helped her get better." Tyler started crying then, the kind of deep, wrenching sobs that come from a grief too big for an 11-year-old body to contain. Jamie stood perfectly still, his face cycling through denial, anger, and finally, a terrible understanding. "Did Dad kill Mom?" he asked directly. I could have deflected. I could have said we'd discuss it later when they were older and better able to process the information. But these boys had been lied to enough. They deserved truth, even when it was devastating. "Yes," I said. "He did." Jamie nodded slowly, like I'd confirmed something he'd been afraid to think, but had suspected all along. "What happens to us now?" Detective Rodriguez approached us carefully, his expression gentle despite the handcuffs and police cars and general chaos of the arrest scene. "Your grandmother has been approved for emergency custody," he told the boys. "You'll be staying with her while we sort everything else out." "For how long?" Tyler asked through his tears. I thought about the legal proceedings ahead, the trials and testimony and eventual convictions. I thought about life insurance money that would now go to the boys' education and future instead of funding Marcus and Crystal's escape plan. I thought about the empty bedrooms in my house that had been waiting for grandchildren to fill them again. "For as long as you want," I said. "This is your home now." As we walked toward my car, leaving behind the baseball game and the police cars and the wreckage of Marcus Patterson's carefully constructed lies, Tyler slipped his small hand into mine. Jamie walked on my other side, straight-backed and determined, already becoming the man he'd need to be to help his little brother through what was coming next. Behind us, I could hear Crystal screaming at the officers about immunity deals and cooperation agreements, apparently ready to throw Marcus completely under the bus in exchange for a lighter sentence. Even in custody, their partnership was dissolving into the same selfish calculation that had characterized their entire relationship. But I wasn't thinking about them anymore. I was thinking about Sarah, and justice finally being served. I was thinking about 2 little boys who would grow up knowing their grandmother had fought for them when no one else would. Most of all, I was thinking about how much Marcus Patterson was going to regret the day he sent me that text message about millions and will readings. Because he was about to discover that sometimes the biggest mistake you can make is underestimating a grandmother's love. Marcus Patterson was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole on a Tuesday morning in September, exactly 6 months after Sarah's funeral. Crystal Morrison received 25 to life after her cooperation deal fell through when prosecutors discovered she'd been the primary architect of the murder plan. I sat in the front row of the courtroom with Jamie and Tyler on either side of me, watching the man who'd called me Mom for 7 years learn what justice looked like. He'd aged dramatically during the months of trials and pre-trial detention. When the judge asked if he had anything to say before sentencing, Marcus stood and turned toward us. For a moment, I thought he might apologize, might show some shred of remorse for destroying his children's lives and murdering their mother. Instead, he said, "I want my sons to know that everything I did was for their future financial security." Jamie stood up then, my brave 13-year-old grandson who'd grown into a young man over these terrible months. "We don't want your blood money," he said clearly, his voice carrying across the silent courtroom. "We want our mom back." The judge had to call for order as Marcus's remaining family members, the few who'd still been supporting him, finally understood what kind of man they'd been defending. Tyler stayed seated beside me, but I felt his small hand squeeze mine in solidarity with his brother's words. That afternoon, we drove to Sarah's grave for the first time since the arrests. I'd been waiting until we could visit her as a family, with the truth finally revealed and justice finally served. The boys brought drawings they'd made in the art therapy sessions their school counselor had recommended. I brought yellow roses, just like I used to bring for their grandfather when they were little. "Do you think she knows?" Tyler asked as we arranged the flowers on the headstone. "About Dad going to jail and everything?" I looked at my daughter's name carved in granite, at the dates that bracketed a life cut far too short by the man who'd promised to love and protect her. "I think she knows we fought for her," I said. "I think she knows you boys are safe now." That evening, as I was helping Tyler with his homework and listening to Jamie practice guitar in the living room, my phone rang. The caller ID showed the name of the insurance company that had been fighting the life insurance claim for months. "Mrs. Patterson, this is David Wheeler from Mutual Life Insurance. I'm calling to inform you that the policy payout has been approved and will be transferred to the beneficiary's trust account within 72 hours. $2 million, held in trust for my grandsons until they turned 18. Money that would pay for college, for opportunities, for the kind of future Sarah had dreamed of giving them. Money that Marcus had planned to steal, but that would now serve its intended purpose, securing her children's futures." After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen looking around at the house that had been too quiet for too many years and was now filled with the sounds of childhood again. Homework questions and video games and arguments about bedtimes. The beautiful chaos of a family rebuilding itself from tragedy. My phone buzzed with a text message. For just a moment, my blood chilled as I remembered that last text from Marcus about will readings and millions. But this message was from Jamie. "Thanks for everything, Grandma. Love you." I looked at those words for a long time, thinking about love and loss and the strange ways life can break your heart and heal it in the same breath. Sarah was gone, and nothing would ever change that. But her sons were safe, her killer was behind bars, and somewhere in the space between grief and hope, we were learning how to be a family again. Marcus Patterson had thought he was so clever, planning the perfect crime and positioning himself for a comfortable future built on murder and deception. But he'd forgotten one crucial detail. Never mess with a grandmother who's got nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. Justice, it turned out, was a dish best served by someone who knew exactly how to use every weapon in her arsenal. And I was just getting started living the rest of my life. The boys were home. The truth was revealed. And somehow, against all odds, we were going to be okay. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.